Welcome to the TC Podcast. I'm Josh Larson, editor over at thinkchristian.net. We talk about faith and pop culture because there's no such thing as secular. The Advent season has just begun. Now, when I was a kid, the lighting of those candles at church each Advent Sunday, for me, it mostly worked as a countdown to the day when I would get some presents. Today, we have a present for you, hopefully a more thoughtful approach to the Advent season. With the help of Roslyn Hernandez and Abby Olcese, we're going to offer 5 films, at least 5 films. I think we'll probably get to some titles beyond that, but movies that evoke the themes of each Advent Sunday. So hope, faith, joy, peace, and then the realization of all of those in the person of Jesus Christ on Christmas Day. Some Christmas-themed movies will be a part of this mix, but we'll also have some surprising ones that evoke Advent in unexpected ways. Now, before we get to those picks, a bit of a programming heads up. We're already planning our best of 2023 episodes of the podcast, and we want you to be a part of that. So you can do that by sharing your favorite 2023 movies, TV, and music. Do this via social media or email. Now, if you want to connect with us on Facebook or on Twitter/X, you can find us at Think Christian. Better yet, go ahead and email us, tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. That way you can even send an audio file where you talk a little bit about your favorite movie, TV show, or piece of music from last year. We might be able to play that on the show. So again, that's tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. Okay, let's get back to the season at hand and talk Advent movies with Roslyn and Abby. A happy Advent to Roslyn Hernandez and Abby Olcese, who join me now to discuss a handful of Advent-themed movies. Before we get to the films, you two, I'm curious how you both mark Advent. Do you do those calendars, that you can pick up pretty much everywhere now and have many themes beyond just the Christmas story theme? Does your church do the candles, the Advent wreath with the candles? Maybe something else. How about you, Roslyn?
Yeah, I grew up in a Pentecostal church and we didn't really have an Advent tradition. So it's something that I have definitely been exploring more on my own as I have grown up and gone to seminary and gone to different churches. So it's definitely something that I really like to do Advent guides and be more reflective in this time. And also the different other churches that I've been to since I went to seminary. I have also started, have the services and light the candles, and so that's a really great way, I think, of doing some kind of ritual that really invites us to contemplation and to meditation that I really enjoy.
Yeah. There's something wonderful about having a tradition from childhood that you're still participating in, but also something kind of cool about experiencing other practices at other churches. So both ways can work really well. What's your experience been, Abby? And is there something you tend to do most recent years every year?
Yeah, Advent was always kind of a big deal in my house. I grew up going to a Presbyterian church in Evanston that made kind of a big deal out of it, and we had Advent calendars at home. In more recent years, my mom and I have matching digital Advent calendars that she buys for us every year that have these little fun activities that go with them. They tend to not be very religious, but they are a lot of fun. And then my church also has a number of practices that I think are really cool. They have a weekly meditation service that lasts about an hour every Wednesday leading up to Advent. And then something specifically that they do that I really like called the longest night of the year on December 20th, which is specifically a time of kind of meditation and healing for people who might be having a more emotionally fraught relationship with Christmas and Advent. And it's proved to be really meaningful for us as a church community, I think the last couple of years that we've done it.
Great. Yeah, that contemplation element has always been a part of Advent, but I feel like, especially with the experience of the pandemic and being forced to take it slow even more than usual and chill, that has resonated more strongly, at least for me, in recent years. And Abby, it was actually during the pandemic, November 2020, you wrote a post for Think Christian that sort of inspired the idea for this episode we're doing here. Over at thinkchristian.net, you wrote, you offered folks 5 titles, basically, that they could watch at home. Churches at that time were mostly still closed, and for people to mark Advent in maybe a new way or a different way if they couldn't in their usual traditional way. So you gave 5 titles, 5 suggestions. Each of us is going to bring a new title to add to those. But I thought maybe, if you wouldn't mind, Abby, quickly going through the 5 that you did choose just for some context. And maybe you can mention quickly too, you connected each pick with one of the themes, the Sunday themes for Advent as well. So yeah, run us through that real quick if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. Even though I wrote about these and I've read the article a lot in preparation for my own book, which uses a lot of these titles but expands on them a little bit, I had to kind of go back and make sure that I knew all the titles that I went through. But for week 1, Hope, I used The Last Jedi as kind of an example of what the hope of the original Star Wars trilogy looks like 40 years on from that first saga. For the second week, I have The Bishop's Wife, which is an older film from 1947 that I've always found surprisingly progressive in its views on what Advent and Christmas are really for versus the materialism that is usually associated with it. For week 3, which is Joy, I look at Paddington 2, which is kind of, I think, a good example of joy as sort of an active choice that we make in our lives to bring joy to our lives, to interact with other people joyfully, and to kind of see what the overarching effects of joy are when we choose to behave that way toward other people. And the fourth week piece is a film I chose called Joyeux Noël, which is like a multilingual film, but French in its production, that came out in 2005 that is about the Christmas truce of 1914 during World War I. Or at least one imagining of what the Christmas truce might have looked like for a group of Scottish and French and German soldiers as they kind of spend an unexpected couple of days together in fellowship during the course of the war.
It's wonderful. I love the mix that you bring there. And so then do we have 5? Did you get all 5? Is that
the fifth one is kind of the realization of all of those themes together. And for that one, I chose Peter Hedges's film Ben is Back, which is a more recent
that's
film.
right.
Yeah, like only a few years old, as an example of kind of really intense parental and child love. What like the kind of the source of that, what it looks like in action, and the different kind of worldly forces that conspire to make that more difficult in real life than we would like it to be.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. We'll link to that original post so folks can read up on all of those. But there's the 5. We promised 5 in the title of the episode, so we've hit those. But let's move beyond that. Let's bring some new ones into the mix because I just love. This is a very rich topic. I think is to see the various markers on the church calendar, which I know your book is about, through the lens of film. And so I'm excited to hear about a couple more here. Let's get into our picks, starting with you, Roslyn. Your title, decidedly not a Christmas movie at first glance, not one that would immediately come to mind. So, of course, I was intrigued. I was unfamiliar with it, had heard about it, had not seen it myself until just watching it for this show. And it became clear to me very early on how it might be connected to Advent. But why don't you tell us the title of the film, a little bit about what it's about, and the Christmas connection that you made?
Yeah, so the film that I chose is called For Sama, and admittedly, it's a difficult film to watch. It is about Syrian refugees, about Syrian people in Aleppo and how they were, bombarded, and just it's the story of this mother, really, telling or creating this film for her daughter, whom she has during this very difficult time. And so I think for me, whenever I think about Advent, and this might be a reactionary stance on my part, I'm openly admitting that, but as Abby mentioned, there's so much commercialization, and it's just the holiday gets so capitalized in our culture that I think I really wanted to think about the nativity story that brings us Christmas. And if we think about that, much like what's happening in the world today, there's this young Palestinian family having to flee their home because, there's an occupying force that is committing infanticide and they have to leave their home. And so we can't, I think sometimes we sanitize the Christmas story in some sense. We domesticate a lot of our own Christian stories, and there is a lot of pain and a lot of human suffering in those stories, but it is out of that pain that we get like hope, like joy. And so this film really has a lot of suffering. There is death, and I think sometimes we forget. In the nativity story, there was death. There were a lot of children that died, possibly families. There was a lot of mothers suffering for their children. There were a lot of fathers suffering for their children. And in the midst of that, we get Mary and Joseph having hope for their child and hope for this calling that they have from God, right? To bring this child into the world. And that film raises a lot of questions like that. Like, should we really do that? Should we stay here? Should we go and, be refugees, or should we go somewhere else? And another thing that the film really has is that in the midst of all that pain and suffering and violence, you get these moments of like really deep love and like familial connections and bonds that get formed, and just like these themes of Advent of like hope and joy and love, and that we can have those two things and hold them together. I think sometimes it doesn't feel easy. And many times, especially in Western society, it doesn't feel like, oh, well, you can't be sad and happy at the same time, or you can't hold difficult emotions and be joyous at the same time. But yet there are these people, all over the world who have difficult situations, and they don't have um, a say about, like, that's out of their hands. And yet in the midst of that difficulty, they have hope and they have joy and they have love and they have celebrations to celebrate how God is still with them. And yeah, so that's why I chose that. There's also, it lasts for the film goes from like 2014 to 2016. So they do go through several Christmases, and they do kind of, they enjoy seeing the snow, and they enjoy kind of like having each other to celebrate being alive, just being alive. And so that's why I chose that film, which I think, it's difficult, but I think it helps to remind us that much of what we get to have in this time, other people don't get to have that. And sometimes we get to enjoy things, and it comes through suffering, or things can be enjoyed, or we can find joy and hope even in the midst of suffering.
When you remind yourself of those elements of the first Christmas story that you're talking about, Roslyn, it strikes me as such a contemporary story, that there are families, refugee families with infants, experiencing even today things very similar. And this film, For Sama, documents that. I want to mention the woman's name, who's a journalist, the mother here, Wad Al-Khatib, and she co-directs the film, is credited as co-director with Edward Watts, and it's essentially her narrating, as the title implies, to the camera over the course of these years at the start of the Syrian civil war, first to her baby who's on the way, and then after she is born, this experience of having this infant while they're living under siege, really, from the Syrian regime, and also Russian bombardment from airplanes above. It's shocking what they are trying to survive while running this hospital that her husband has started. That's their daily life, is keep this hospital going of victims of these shellings, keep them alive while also raising a child. So I'm very glad that I was nudged to see this, knowing it was difficult material. It's one of those that might have sat on the back shelf. So thank you for bringing it to the forefront. Abby, I don't know if you saw it for the first time for this or if you had already seen For Sama.
Yeah, this was my first viewing. I think, Josh, like you, I had been aware of it. I think the film itself is not all that. I think it came out like a couple of years ago. I remember it being kind of a big deal on the awards circuit for a little while. But yeah, often like kind of knowing that I should see it and then kind of avoiding it because I knew that the subject matter would be really bleak. But yeah, I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to watch it. It was really powerful.
Yeah, and we should emphasize even more just for listeners. This is difficult content, and you've described some of it, Roslyn. The most difficult scene for me is probably the one where it locked in as an Advent film, though, and that is the miracle birth
Oh my gosh.
that we see. It's so harrowing. This is at the hospital where her husband and others are working. Her husband, Hamza, want to make sure you mention his name. And a woman comes in, a pregnant woman, a victim of shelling into the emergency room. She appears to be dead, and they perform this emergency C-section. And just like the gasp that came out of me when they did bring the baby out, very difficult moment to watch. But how about, there are so many attempts at resuscitation to the point where I was saying to myself, just stop, just stop, because it was so difficult to watch. And then we get that cry and you see the baby's open eyes and it's like just wrenching. You never thought that was going to be possible. So it's absolutely a miracle birth. We learn the mother survives too, but, yeah, right then and there, I was thinking about how intense this movie was, and if I didn't know if I could take it, and also like this is very much an Advent movie in terms of a miracle birth. So, so that is For Sama.
Something else, just really quickly, it's told from the mother's perspective, and Advent is like we get Mary's story and like Mary's perspective and point of view, and I think a lot of times that's also something that we don't see a lot in Christmas films. And Wad mentions in the film like my story, and like I keep recording because it's the only way that I can resist. And so narrative is a very powerful thing, and when we get to say it and when we get to give our perspective on our own narrative, it's a very powerful thing too for the world and not just for ourselves.
I like that. All right, Abby, let's get to your pick. A very, very different film, though it does also involve a baby. And you two did not coordinate this. So which film did you go with?
We both went the baby direction. And I would argue that this film has some pretty harrowing situations for a baby. I picked Satoshi Kon's film Tokyo Godfathers, which is kind of a re-adaptation of I guess there are like two versions of this film. Like the American version of this film is called Three Godfathers. And one of them, I think probably the more notable of the two, is a Western starring John Wayne, which I have not seen and I'm very curious to watch. But this is an anime version that takes place in Tokyo, kind of in the space between Christmas and New Year's. And it centers on a trio of homeless people. We have Hana, who is she doesn't self-identify as a trans woman, but she's definitely like within that milieu. She says at the beginning that in my heart, I am a woman. So we've got that as part of her identity. We have Jin, who is kind of a middle-aged older man who is an alcoholic, and Miyuki, who is a teenage runaway. And the three of them are kind of scrounging around to find dinner together on Christmas Eve. And as they search, find an abandoned baby on a pile of trash. And Hana, after having asked for a Christmas miracle, immediately takes to the baby and becomes a maternal figure and names her Kyoko, which means pure. And in their course of trying to find the parents of this baby, or to find this baby a home, a family to stay with, because obviously this baby can't survive on the street, there are a number of kind of miraculous things that happen to the three of them. And all of them somehow involve the three of them having to deal with the conflicts or issues or relationships that led them to leave their homes in the first place and kind of reconcile those relationships together.
Yeah, it's a really, really good film. I'd also recommend Satoshi Kon's Paprika and Millennium Actress. Those are two great ones as well. So if you're looking for other anime recommendations, you mentioned, Abby, the 1948 John Wayne Western that it's based on Three Godfathers. Believe it or not, another Think Christian post back in 2016, David Kern wrote one. It was called Five Other Christmas Movies You Should See. So just kind of
That's
like
fantastic.
unexpected, unusual. He covered Three Godfathers. So definitely a good connection here. We actually talked about it under the Advent theme of peace. So in opposition to sort of gunslinging violence that you'd get in a Western, how this John Wayne film is a little bit different than that. So anyways, that's just more movies for you to check out. But Roslyn, what'd you make of this version, Tokyo Godfathers?
Yeah, I mean, the theme of the child being someone, that brings people together was really apparent, and really it brings us like a sweetness and like a heartwarming aspect to the film, and to the person as you're watching it, right? What I really loved was Hannah's motherly aspect and like being, and it wasn't just with the baby, it was also with I think it's Miyoko, the teenager who was run away, and she really makes them a family. It's Hannah who holds them together, and I think there's so many aspects of her that are so gentle. I really love that she says a haiku several times throughout the film, and to like mark like the thing that's happening. There's a really funny one even when she talks about her mom's breath, and then her mom like sneezes. And it was just, I think it's like three haikus, three or four of them throughout the film, but that really kind of make you like stop and meditate on what is happening. Like when she talks about her mom, she's like, oh, like this is my mom, or this is someone whom I was connected with and whom I have a bond with, even if I have left home. This is someone that I love. There's a lot of misadventures and a lot of miracles in this film, which I really loved. I think the aspect of love and being family and redemption was really hopeful in this, because even when they think they found the mother and it turns out it's not the mom, and then you find out you get to learn so many backstories that are so full of pain, and then you understand why people are acting the way they are, or what's bringing them to do the things that they're doing, and then to find not just the interactions with Hana and Jin and Miyuki and the baby, the way that those people interact with others in the film brings them to reflection and to like redeem their own stories. Like that woman's husband, so this woman tries to steal the baby. Well, she stole it in the first place, and then tries to steal it again, and then the husband's like realizes, towards the end, like, oh, like I really lacked, some of like someone in the care towards my wife. Like I could have been a better husband, or like there's more that I can do, or like don't, like there's hope for us. Let's try again, kind of thing. So yeah, I think there was it was really fun. It was really funny. It was some moments of like just like the and like really meditating on life, and like the bond and the goodness of humanity, because these are three people that are unhoused, and these are the people that saved this child and are looking to do the right thing, and are sometimes seen by others as people that aren't worthy, but they show how worthy they are, and how much, even though they are mistreated, they like don't treat others in that way in return.
So that's Tokyo Godfathers. And we're circling closer, I think, to more explicit Christmas content here with my pick, which is set over the Christmas holidays. There are decorations almost in every scene. I wouldn't say it's, explicitly religiously minded, however, though I found a lot in there. The movie is The Holdovers, and this is a recent release. I believe it might still be in some theaters by the time this episode is out. It will be available for sure digitally for rent or purchase. So if you missed it and it's not in theater around you, you can find it there. The Christmas miracle in this one is that the director, Alexander Payne, he's made, darkly comic, really bitter human comedies like Sideways and About Schmidt. Here he has a movie that's full of Christmas spirit. It takes place, Holdovers takes place at a New England prep school, as I said, during the Christmas season of 1971, so a bit of a period piece here. Everyone else has left the school for the holiday, but one teacher, played by Paul Giamatti, who also appears in Sideways, he's forced to stay behind and supervise a handful of students who can't go home for a variety of reasons. So eventually the movie condenses and focuses on three characters. Giamatti's teacher, named Paul Hunnam, and then a particularly troubled and difficult but bright student named Angus, played by newcomer Dominic Sessa, and then the school's chef named Mary, and played by Divine Joy Randolph. She's staying over the break as well, partially to grieve in relative privacy over the recent death of her son in the Vietnam War. So you can probably see where this is going. It's a familiar trajectory. The screenplay is by David Hemmingson, that these three are going to, not want to be there, get on each other's nerves, but come to form this surrogate family. That does happen, but the delicacy with which all of that is handled by Payne, I think, and really these three leads makes The Holdovers special. I was listening to Linda Holmes on Pop Culture Happy Hour talk about this movie, and all of a sudden my ears perked up the terminology she was using. She said this at one point: it's really, to me, about grace. It's about people finding a way to have these moments of grace that come to them in really different ways. Now, she goes on, to define what she means by this in humanist terms, but I actually think the movie itself is more explicitly Christian. These small acts of kindness that these three characters learn to express, and they have to learn to express them. It doesn't come naturally necessarily to all of them. They register as gifts to me, symbolically, and then actually literally when we get to Christmas Day and they're still stuck together and then gifts are actually exchanged. So just one example I'll give of that real quickly here, because I want to hear what you two made of this movie too. Mary's meals and Mary's hospitality. The fact that they come, first of all, from the groceries that have been left over. I think she says at one point something like, we're going to have to make do with what we got. But she makes these meals for them. Eventually, they come to share them together, and especially for this Christmas feast that she prepares. So going back to something you said early on, Roslyn, about the rampant consumerism that's come to define the holidays, I think we forget, or we can forget, that all this present exchanging during Advent and on Christmas, it's meant to be an echo, right, of the gift of the gospel, which was offered by a lowly birth in Bethlehem in unexpected ways. So this movie captured that original sense of gift giving at Christmas to me. It was an incredibly moving reminder of that. I've talked to so many people about this movie who have loved it as well. So I'm eager to see what you two made of it. What do you think of The Holdovers, Roslyn?
It was really fun to watch. I think that the dynamics between Paul, Mary, and Angus are just hilarious. And Mary is very tender and hospitable, but she's also the one telling them how it is. She's
true.
The one saying the truth, and putting them in their place. And yeah, and I think that's just, I think I love the fact that, especially that she's also a Black woman, that she is. And this film holds a lot of tensions like that. People feel left or cast aside or abandoned by their family. And yet they find, human connection and even growth in one another. And for me, it's also kind of a little bit of a coming of age story, because Angus really grows, but it's not just Angus. I think Paul also grows a lot from this.
For sure.
He starts being so tied to this place that he feels comfortable and safe in. of really caring for this boy who is kind of a pain at times and choosing to be on his side and not just look out for himself and his job and the ways in which he has felt safe in that position as a teacher in that school.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, that it has that element of grieving and sadness for all three of them, because it is very funny, as you say, but it's not like a laugh out loud comedy throughout by any means. So there's a lot of tension here.
Yeah,
What'd you make of it, Abby?
I think it's something that's grown on me the more that I think about it. Roslyn, you mentioned kind of the tension and just kind of taking the joyful with the sad. I feel like one scene that is really powerful for me that illustrates that well is so Mary obviously is grieving the death of her son, who's grown or was grown when he died, but her sister is about to have a baby, and she is initially not sure she wants to go visit her sister because she doesn't think she can handle it. But about 3/4 of the way through the film, she decides to visit her, and notably, importantly, she brings along her son's baby clothes to give to her sister, to clothe her baby, which the more I think about it, just makes me want to cry. It's so beautiful. Like Paul and Angus kind of falling on swords for each other throughout the film. Like Angus kind of coming to Paul's rescue in like an awkward conversation situation by like basically lying for him, even though he's been told by Paul a number of times that like people who go to this school don't lie. Barton men don't lie. And then later when Paul kind of sort of lies, but not really, to protect Angus and to help him stay in the school so he won't get kicked out, and eventually loses his job for it. It's such a beautiful moment as well. Like it's a moment of growth for him. It's kind of this uncertain moment of sacrifice where like you're not sure if he knows that that's going to be, like he hopes it's going to be meaningful for Angus. I don't think he knows if Angus really groks that, but I can tell, like you can tell that he will, because that's exactly the kind of like the form of kindness that he needed in that moment. And there's a bit where Angus and Paul are in a store together, and Angus tells him like, "Hey, I've never really known which of your eyes to look at," because he has a lazy eye. And in that moment, when he leaves the office, like right after he's been fired, he looks at Angus and he says, "It's this one. This is the eye you should look at," which made me both like laugh and cry at the same time, because it's a really funny payoff, but also it's just like, oh man. So yeah, it's.
Yeah, some great.
Yeah, it's just
great
filled with moments
screenwriting
like
there
that are all like just like small moments where like it's asking the audience, I think, to pay close attention to these characters and their growth, so that when that comes back around, you understand how meaningful it is in that moment. But I think also like clearly those characters are paying attention to each other, like they are recognizing the needs that each other has, and they are recognizing the value of the conversations they've been having together throughout the movie, so that when it pays off, it really hits hard. And I think that's a great example of like what makes a good Christmas movie and a good Advent movie, is when you see kind of all of those forms of grace and love kind of coming together in like one wonderful package.
Mm. Yeah, I've been telling folks, trying to capture the mood and feeling of the Holdovers, that it's sort of a live action Charlie Brown Christmas special. Just that sense of melancholy, and we do get some Christmas carols on the soundtrack. It's constantly snowing. There's a hushed softness to it. A lot of funny bits, as we've described, but also some real sadness and then tenderness mixed in too. So that's the Holdovers. Abby brought Tokyo Godfathers. Roslyn, you brought For Sama. We will link to those three titles and mention them in the show notes. We'll also link to Abby's post and David Kern's as well. You will be overwhelmed with Christmas Advent movie options after listening to this episode. Way more than 5 there. Thank you both for helping me do this. Abby, you mentioned your book that has kind of been inspired by this idea, and other posts you've written for Think Christian around the church calendar.
Yeah, I'm in revisions right now, but the book itself, if everything stays on schedule, so fingers crossed, should be out around this time next year. Like they're thinking like a fall release for 2024. So right in time for Advent, really.
Perfect. Great. Can't wait for that. Roslyn, are you on a bit of a Christmas break already with the FYI on Youth Ministry podcast, or is there something you'd like to point listeners to?
Yeah, I can point listeners to the Chasing Justice podcast, which I also produce, and we're doing a season right now. We're in the middle of a season, you can jump in at any time. And it's loosely based on how we can be social justice minded or how we can take action based on our personality or loosely based on the Enneagram. So if you're, someone who's more of a gentle person and, more of an investigator, or if you're like an Enneagram 1 and really wants to reform things, like we have people that are already doing the work of justice who have identified themselves as those personality types, and they have talked to us about how they have in their journey, how they have learned to do the work to best suit their personality and their, sustainability within that, and how we can all do justice work. It doesn't always have to be, going out there and marching or, turning over tables, and, we can all do it from our own way.
What a great idea. That's chasing justice. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thanks again to both of you. I hope you both have a meaningful Advent season. That does it for new episodes for 2023. Next month, we're going to be spending a lot of time looking back on the best movies, TV, and music from this year. So we'll have 3 episodes coming at you in January with the entire podcast team celebrating the best pop culture of 2023. As always, we want you to be a part of these shows. So you can do that by sharing your favorite 2023 movies, TV, and music. Find us on Facebook or Twitter/X @ThinkChristian, or send those in via email, tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. That way you can send an audio file, if you'd like, of you talking about your pick, and we might be able to play that on the show. So that's tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. The TC Podcast is a listener-supported program of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder, and Reframe's co-director overseeing content strategy is Robin Basselin. I'm Josh Larson. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next month to talk about how a number of corners of our pop culture fandom connect with our faith.